All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hokyoji's Sunday Dharma Talk. And it is my distinct privilege to welcome today's speaker, Tonen O'Connor. Reverend O'Connor is the Resident Priest Emerita of the Milwaukee Zen Center, where she began practicing as a layperson in 1986. Received ordination from Tozen Akiyama in 1994 and Dharma transmission in 1999. Succeeding Reverend Akiyama as resident priest in 2001, a position she held until 2011, returning as head teacher from 2013 to 2015. Tonen trained in Japan at Shogoji, Hosshinji, Hokyoji, and prior to the pandemic made regular visits to practice at Saikouji. She joined with Zuiko Redding of the Cedar Rapids Zen Center to lead for 8 years the Great Sky Sesshin, the forerunner of Hokyoji's present Jewel Mirror Sesshin. Beginning in 1998, for 17 years, Tonen offered Buddhist programs within the Wisconsin State Prison System and works today with inmates via correspondence seminar. Tonen served on the boards of the Cedar Rapids Zen Center and the Sanshin Zen Community. Her published works include a translation of the French version of Kodo Suwaki's commentary on the Song of Awakening, essays in The Hidden Lamp and The Eightfold Path, and most recently she conceived, edited, and wrote the introduction to Dharma Gates Are Boundless, featuring articles by brilliant African-American artist currently incarcerated within the Wisconsin system. Tonen, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Can you all hear me? I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing Tushin, but I'll do my best here. I'm delighted to be here. It's great to spend a little bit of time with you this morning. And I thought that what we might talk about a little bit today is this business of paying attention. And I don't mean paying attention as in thinking about or observing. I'm thinking more of paying attention as being awake, waking up without a lot of obstructed thoughts in our minds so that we can be fully present where we are. So paying attention to me means I'm right here. I'm fully aware. I'm part of what's happening here. So that's the way in which I find myself using the word paying attention, the words paying attention. Now, Dogen has some pretty interesting things to say about this business. And I want to talk this morning, share this morning a little bit, some of his thoughts from a couple of fascicles that he has. The first one has to do, of course, with how we study, and it's called reading a sutra. Well, a sutra is a teaching. I love the fact that the word comes from a Sanskrit word meaning to string, like beads on a string, lots of little morsels of understanding, if we pay attention. So the first thing that comes to mind when I think about reading a sutra is all the famous ones, and have I read them? Have I read them so I can quote them, or have I read them so they're now part of my life? So the trick for me with paying attention to reading a sutra on the page is not so much can I acquire a bunch of quotes, but what does this mean to me today in my life? And if I don't get it, go back and kind of wrestle with it a little bit and see if it does. Maybe it doesn't, but I need to really be very attentive when I'm reading a sutra. However, because they really do offer truths about how to live our life. But there is another way in which, particularly Dogen, likes to think of sutras. You don't just read them on a piece of paper. Everything around us is constantly teaching. We're about to study in a discussion group that I lead, the Mountains and Waters Sutra. Not about mountains and waters, but that mountains and waters themselves are a teaching. They are a remarkably informative presence. And So, mountains, waters, plants, rocks, sunlight, all of these things are sutras. But the issue becomes for me, well, fine, I understand that, but how do I read a mountain? How do I read the desk I'm sitting at? And it seems to me that we do it first by being absolutely present with them, so that understanding them is not a question of deciding that, a mountain teaches me about strength, it teaches me about, but to be with the mountain. There are some writings that will say that the mountains accept those who are in them, with them. So this whole business is about being with something as fully as we can in the best way that we understand how to do it. And I love the fact that there is a teaching going on. There's something speaking to me every time I look not only at the natural world. It's kind of wonderful and romantic to think of all the beautiful trees and plants and rivers and lakes, but it's also about wastebaskets and cats and the window I happen to be looking out of at this moment. Um, so we can join in experiencing them in this moment. So we keep going back to the fact, am I here? Or am I off in my head someplace? Am I truly here? If I'm truly here, I begin to experience amazing things, I think. And Dogen, interestingly enough, in another fascicle, where he talks about this business of do insentient beings, like a rock, you know, preach the Dharma. As I think most of you know, this was an enormous discussion that went on for probably far too long within the Buddhist community, because initially the idea was that a sentient being, like you or me, maybe some in the animal world, but mostly human beings, had the ability to approach and understand the teachings. And as you know, the teachings are about how things really are. So Dharma is not just the sutra I read, but it's how things really are. Well, if that's the case, things, you heard me say things, that means everything that's in this moment is part of that Dharma moment. And so finally, they began to understand that what I've just been talking to you about, that a mountain is a sutra, a sunset is a sutra, that there are things that we learn. And I think we learn sometimes with this head. I'm always fascinated by seeing a plant grow, for instance, to begin to think about, there's a seed and then the seed grows and the whole process is fascinating. That's one kind of hearing the insentient teach me, but the other is acknowledging and experiencing my connection. Because if you remember, the teaching is that everything is connected. Not just the things we'd like to be connected with either, unfortunately, but that everything is working together. In fact, I sometimes think, we have that's what I want, a term we use all the time called practice enlightenment or practice realization. And I've always kind of stuck on that one because I thought, what? I'm practicing. And then it began to come to me that the tricky word is realization, because does it mean that when I practice, I realize something? Or does it mean that the practice is realizing, actualizing that moment? So that our practice is being in the broadest sense of that. And as I began to think about that, I began to think about this word enlightenment and began to realize that in a great deal, particularly of Dogen, enlightenment is the perfectly, I was going to say coordinated, that's not quite the right word, but the perfectly collaborating presence of all things. That's enlightenment. That's why it's so hard for us to become, quote, enlightened, because we have too many things that drag us away, too many wants, too many things that we hate, too much stuff to be a full participant. But full participation for me is a kind of enlightenment. Obviously, we don't do it all the time. I don't read sutras, if you will. I don't appreciate every moment. I don't understand every moment. I'm often worrying and fussing, and I'm off in my head. However, we do have those moments, and I think they're quite.
Tonen, I think you accidentally muted yourself.
Sorry, I accidentally. How many pearls of wisdom did you miss? Sorry about that. My hand must have just hit the computer. Um, how, I'll go back a little.
Just a couple.
Okay, good. But thanks for warning me. I didn't, I shouldn't, I should keep my hands to myself, is what it means. This is one of those, are you a person that talks with their hands? Well, unfortunately, yes. So I should sit on them maybe here at the computer. But anyway, what I was talking about was this business of insentient beings preaching the Dharma and suggesting that because everything is the Dharma, how things are, we all participate, except it's very tough for us as people because we're always withdrawing from participation into our head and into our desires, and into our fears, and into the things that keep a sort of enlightened being from happening. So a lot of our practice, I feel, is to begin to allow ourselves to be part of all this. And then went on to say that Dogen, in a fascicle he actually calls Insentient Beings Preach the Dharma, says you can hear the Dharma first with body and then with mind, which I find that very interesting. We have an instinctive sense of presence that is quite accurate, actually, if we let it be. Then we can think about what we experienced. But the experience always comes first, and then our description of it. Unless, and this is sort of the kicker, I look at something with a prejudged opinion, because that's going to warp the experience if I've already got an idea about something. And it affects the situation, which oddly enough came up into my mind was that from the time I was very small, I was terrified of dogs. One of my most exciting experiences was being knocked down by a German Shepherd who really only wanted to lick my face, but I was 4 years old and I thought I was being killed. But then I began to have dogs and loved them. And yet, that little sense of what is a dog, my neighbors up front had a dog who rushed and barked only at me because he knew that I somehow thought it made him nervous, dangerous. So, I mean, that's a silly example, but I do think that if we can approach the famous open mind, it's very helpful. So there's another way I think that we work with this business of sutras. You know, we chant sutras. We love to chant them. And there's a wonderful example that Dogen gives in this particular fascicle. He talks about Dongshan, a very famous teacher, and an official. And they had a meeting, and I like to think they were discussing sutras, you know, what they are and whatnot. And they didn't come to any conclusion. When it finished, the official bowed to Dongshan, and Dongshan bowed back. And as the official walked away, Dongshan called him and said, and he turned around, of course, "Do you understand?" And the official said, "No, no, I'm afraid I don't understand." And Dongshan said, "We have just chanted together the whole canon of sutras." the interaction between the two of them is a realization, it is a learning, it is a relationship, which is a sutra. And so I really love this idea. It's also part of the thing you often hear of in the stories of a monk who attains realization because he struggles and struggles and he can't do it and he walks away. The master calls his name and he says, yes, and he gets it. It's response. It's response. This whole thing, including paying attention, is about response and the ability to respond. There's another story, again, in Dogen's, watch my time here, in Dogen's Fascal that I really like a lot. And this one particularly I like. There is a young monk is reading a sutra, because after all, we have to study sutras. He's reading a sutra. And along comes his master. And so the master says, what are you reading? And the young man says, oh, the Vimalakirti Sutra. The master says, I did not ask you about Vimalakirti. I asked you what you are reading. Are you reading your life? Are you reading your life? Our life is a story. It's a sutra. In the same fascicle, this fascicle is full of wonderful examples, mostly drawn from koan stories. He talks about someone actually offering the opportunity to read him, if you will. It's a very famous thing in which Yao Shan, who's a very famous teacher, had not been teaching. He'd not been doing what I'm doing right now, which is natter away, for quite some time. And so finally, a head monk went and said, look, boss, the monks really, really want you to come and say something. So he comes in, he gets up onto the high seat, and he sits there. And he gets down and goes away. And they're all stunned. Today we'd be ready with our phones to take little notes. He didn't say anything. And of course, he's pursued by the head monk who says, what? I told you they wanted you to teach. And the old man says, how can you criticize me? He had gone up there and he'd offered himself. He'd offered himself to be related to. And they were so busy wanting to take down something for their benefit that they didn't get it. There's another famous story, a similar thing, where Prajnatara, one of the great ancestors, went to a banquet. A wealthy man held, a very fancy meal, and it was quite customary if you were invited as a priest, as a teacher, to something like this, that you would maybe give a reading from a sutra as a sort of thank you for being a guest. And Prajnatara did not. He just ate the meal and, thanked the host and got up to leave. And the host said, excuse me, everybody who comes to these things always reads a text for us, reads a sutra. Don't you read sutras? And Prajnatara says something quite interesting. He basically says, with every in-breath, I'm reading 1,000 million sutras. And every out-breath, I'm reading 1,000 million sutras. But again, he had offered his presence as a sutra, and the host had not gotten it. So I think, for us, the kind of gift that Dogen is offering us is the opportunity to read sutras in every moment of our life. And we can offer the sutra of our lives for other people to read too. Not just in what we say, but in what we do, how we are with people. Now, the second sutra, the same, because it also has to do with this business of sort of being aware, being present. Not sutra, the second fascicle, excuse me, the second fascicle of Dogen's I wanted to speak about was one that is called variously either miracles or mystical powers, because it actually deals with both what we would call miracles and mystical powers. And what, and Dogen's viewpoint, I think, about both of those, a miracle on the one hand and a mystical power on the other, his viewpoint is quite consistent because he views both of them in an unusual way. And he talks about what we think, when I think of a miracle, I think of something astounding, unique, never happened before, impossible, will never happen again. Those are the miracles, the things that are not in any way usual as we understand a miracle. You see a pillar of fire on the road, that's a miracle. But you notice that you saw it, otherwise the road was empty. Nobody else saw it. And you say, well, it's my private miracle. But Dogen suggests that those kinds of things, of happenings, he would call minor miracles, very minor. Why? Well, they happened only once. They happened only in one place, and only a few people saw them. They'll never happen again. We'd call it a one-shot. He said, that's minor. What's major, what's very major, are the things that are astounding in themselves if we, wait a minute, hang on one sec. This astounding action is me plugging my computer in just to make sure it doesn't run out of oomph. Wait a minute here. There we go. The things that, if we think about them, if we pay attention, are astonishing, but we don't pay attention because we think of them as normal. But they have what is for Dogen the signs of a major miracle. They're consistent, they're constant, they can be trusted to happen, they're available everywhere to everyone. And if you think about that, being available to every living thing in this world is astonishing that something would be that. And yet, for us, it's our everyday lives. So he suggests that we don't see the amazingness of all this because it is consistent and we trust it. And in our trust, we tend to sort of think of it as the same old, same old. But suppose I couldn't trust that the sun would come up this morning. The fact that the earth is revolving around the sun is miraculous. But I just assume the sun will come up, and I assume it will go down. Things about ourselves. We go back here to Prajnatara and his sutra with the breathing. But the simple fact that we are, that I can speak to you and you can hear me, particularly with the magic of Zoom, but it didn't have to be that way. Let's put it that way. And so I think Dogen has a particularly interesting take on what is a miracle. And he's suggesting that we should, excuse me, I'm just adjusting myself here, that we should think of, pay attention to and think about the ordinary. And in a way, be grateful for the miracle of the ordinary. And he applies this same kind of sense of the miraculous to what's called mystical powers. Now, you know, within the texts, there are a certain number of mystical powers that Buddhists supposedly have. They can hear everything, they know all past lives, they can read everybody's mind, etc. And he says, well, that's all well and good, but those are not the powers I'm talking about. He said, again, I'm speaking about the powers that we haven't noticed. And I'm sure those of you who are ahead of me think about Layman Pang and his famous quote that his mystical powers were chopping wood and carrying water. And you think, oh, that's nice. But wait a minute. Chopping wood. How does he do that? This is the old why is there something rather than nothing business. We don't really know. We have to assume that he has the power to pick up that axe. He has the power to position the piece of wood. He has the power to raise the axe. Now, the other thing interesting, I was demonstrating here, so I raised my hand. How could I do that? I just had the instinct, the idea, the impulse, the intention to raise my hand. But that's a mystical power because it doesn't have to be that way. So he suggests that, our hearts beating, plants growing, the wind blowing, these should be thought of as major miracles. And our ability to do what we do is in itself a mystical power. And this is, again, I think about being, let's see what I want, having a little sense of gratitude for the fact that we're here at all. Didn't have to be. Everybody's life has things in it also that make you I'm always very aware that I didn't have to be here because my mother had lost, I think, 3 children in miscarriages before I was born. And she had a condition that way back in 1932, they didn't know how to fix. Today they could fix it, but it had to do with the mother and child. And I was born 7 weeks premature cesarean. Whew, barely got here. And every step we take, the fact that you can roll over in bed and put your feet on the floor and stand up is power. So I think what he's also saying to us is to not only to be grateful, but to appreciate and use well all these mystical powers. Don't draw more water than you need. Chop just enough wood. To be aware that not only can we be grateful that we're here, but that because we're here, we now have a little bit of responsibility to use what we have well. So I think that what I'd like to think we can do as we sort of start this new year is, pay attention to read the sutras, chant the sutras, live the sutras, and write the sutras of our lives as well as we can. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. We want to open it up for questions and discussion. You can just unmute yourself.
Anybody? Well,
They're
You
shy.
don't have to
Give them a
stand.
minute. Give them a minute. They're shy.
It's not necessary. I never know whether that means that you got it or you just hated the whole thing, but there you are.
Well, I'll go. I did not. I got it. I loved it, and I did not hate the whole thing. I didn't hate any of it.
Yeah. I don't know that there are a lot of questions about to be had about it. I just hope that, so often we're told to let go, to divest ourselves of, to not this and not that. That for me, I really appreciate when Dogen says, "Oh, but you could do this." That's to me is quite encouraging. Um, there's a way to live in the Dharma that is not about in any way denial. It's about being more with it than ever. So,
It's certainly a part of Dogen that I appreciate more than some of the others. I think one of his is like something to the effect of the generosity. Generosity has never been anything other than earning a living.
yeah,
It's like boom.
yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Uh,
Yes,
so
um,
we have iPad first.
iPad.
Well, I'm the iPad. I have a comment, maybe partly question. I always feel that the idea of trying to be as present as possible with things is something I definitely strive for. Um, but that it's kind of a battle between that and my mind, because my mind is always getting in the way, you know. And we when sit zazen, you can sit for ages, but the mind is still making until you're dead. Your mind is still making comments and trying to lead you astray and all that. So I, I guess what I'm saying is that I think it is very hard to be present. I'm wondering if there's a way of being present that can include the obstacles.
Well, I think it's tricky because the more I intend to be present and not think, the more I think because
Yeah, yeah,
intending to not think. The more I try to be present, the more I'm actually separate. In fact, Dogen talks about this several times in various places. But the more I try, because that trying is a mental effort. I'm really talking about those times when you're just doing something. And I do think that that happens. I mean, I know I can stir the soup without thinking, particularly, except about what I'm doing. So I think it's part of what we're saying here. This is not something to try to do. It's a way of being. And the harder I try to be present, the more I'm observing myself, and I'm actually miles away from this moment because I'm worrying about whether I'm present or not. So I would say, Jim, basically, just don't think about it. You
yeah,
know, do it if your mind is. I mean, that's okay too. I'm not suggesting that the same thing is true with Zazen. The intention is not to blot out your thinking, but to ignore it. You don't have to respond to it. Let it be what it is. I have a friend of mine who's a priest who once said, "We're always saying let it go," and he said, "Let it be. Just leave it alone." Because of course we think during Zazen, um, and there again, I find Zazen very instructive because I'm always reminded about the difference between being here and being away in my head. Because I'll go off somewhere in my head and come back. And learning the difference between just sitting here and being off in my head is helpful because I can now recognize it a little better. So I wouldn't worry if you think during Zazen. Just don't think about not thinking. Yeah, good point. His name is Jim, by the way.
Not iPad.
Fusion, Laura has her hand up.
Yeah, I was going to see if Jim was done. Jim,
Oh, I'm done.
you're good. Okay. Laura? Oh, I lost you.
Tonen, I'm wondering if you probably have a million stories about your work with the prison population, but I'm just wondering if you have any particular story or two about the changes that you've seen through you giving your presence and awareness to that community.
Well, the biggest thing I learned is that they're not the prison population. They're a bunch of people, individual people with individual stories and individual lives, just like all of us here on this screen. Some of them have made hideous mistakes. But I think I've learned two things. One is the value of respect, because these are people who've maybe never respected anybody, or maybe have never been respected in their lives. And I remember somebody asked me once what the heck I thought I could do as a Buddhist, wandering off into meet with these guys, men and women. And there were really two things. One is we very casually talk about impermanence. Everything changes. But when you face a bunch of inmates who are wearing little cards that say offender and are known primarily by the offense that they did 15 years ago in the records, and you say everything changes and you can change, it's like a light goes on. And it's meant that for me, working with people in that situation has been some of the most exciting work I've ever done, because they're serious. I mean, they want to change. It's not just they want to have a little something nicer in their life, or a more peaceful life. They know they have to change who and how they are. And the second thing was that the most important thing I did during all those years, and I do now, I have 10 guys on an email list that I contact every day, and that they get a blog that I do. I showed up. Showing up is the number one thing. It's a little bit about Yao Shan going there and getting up on his seat. He showed up. That was the teaching. You can be trusted. In a world where hardly anybody can be trusted. In terms of the impact, it varies. I'm very proud of 3 or 4 guys that I've gotten out. There were 3 men that were in a book that I was able to edit their life stories called Buddhas Behind Bars, and they're all out now and all doing very, very well. And they were all in for long sentences for major crimes. And in fact, I've been profiting from a completely unexpected thing. I'm now 93 and I no longer drive. So there's the old, how do you get your groceries bit? Who's you going to spend a lot of money on Uber or Lyft, or what are you going to do? Well, I have a splendid guy who every couple of weeks, Doug takes me to the grocery store and to Walgreens, and he runs errands, and he changed the cat span last time he was here. He's absolutely a rock. He's the one I had a bad experience a couple of years ago after surgery and had to go to the emergency room. He's the one who took me. What did I know when I first met him in the year 2000 in prison for homicide, for a sentence so long he would not be released until he was in his 70s, or be eligible for parole. But he fortunately became eligible for parole. He now has his own woodworking business. He's about as upstanding a citizen as you could wish. And he takes me to the grocery store every 2 weeks. How could neither he nor I could know that that would be the upshot of it? I think that, the major thing is that people, you have to want to change. In fact, I had a discussion with Doug just the other day. We were on our way to the grocery store. We were talking about how can you create, there's not right now a sort of link that takes you from, I'm an inmate, I want to do better, and I'm going to get out pretty soon, and I go to the social worker in prison, who then is in real contact with the parole officer, who is in real contact with, there are many organizations here in town that will help people returning to society. But those links are not working at the moment. And so we were talking about how could those connections be made. And Doug said something interesting. As a person who spent 26 years in prison, he said, the inmate has to want to do it. So it starts there. And I think the one thing that maybe I did in a few cases was to tell them that they could want to do it. I mean, in other words, if they wanted to do it, it would make some difference. And I have a few people inside now who probably will never get out, and yet they're doing remarkable things inside. Tutoring other inmates, teaching. One guy is training, there's a program in one of the prisons, he's training dogs as seeing eye dogs or companion dogs. So that's all I can tell you. There's no specific time when some teaching of the Buddha turn the light on for somebody, except I would think the everything changes is probably the key. We're in a situation that looks like it may never change. The other one is, it's very difficult in prison for people to be generous to one another, because it's always a transaction. You don't dare lend somebody something because they'll think you want something from them. And it's a very complicated sort of system. So I found that in the actual Buddhist meetings that we had was the one place where they could actually be helpful to one another without its having any peculiar, residue. Anyway, that's it. But
Thank you. Mhm.
maybe we could go home early.
Anyone else? All right, well, maybe we can go home early. Thank you, Tonen, for your Dharma talk. It was great to see you. Michael says hi. Tonen officiated at our wedding, so.
I'm married.
Oh, let's see. Hokyoji events. Starting this Wednesday is the Hokyoji men's group discussion, Zen and the Roman Emperor with me. That'll be it's the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month. There's still time to register. The winter practice period will be February 2nd through the 15th. 2 weeks. You can sign up for either week or both. If you're thinking about attending, if you could register, that would be nice, so we know who's coming. And then that will pretty much close out our retreat season. We'll have the mud season, and we'll open up again we'll have some rentals, but I think the next Hokyoji event is actually in May. Oh no, there'll be a Caring for the Land in April, but in May, if you want to put on your calendars, the True Heart Women's Retreat. So next Sunday's speaker, let me check on that one, is Reverend Musho Smith. So I hope to see you all next week. And let's close with the 4 vows. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. So good to see everyone. Good to see you, Tonen. Everyone have a great Sunday.
Thank you.